And now on the line is Mullingar history teacher and historian Jason McKevitt. Jason, welcome back to Nair FM.
How are you, Darren? Thank you very much. Good to talk to you.
Okay, cool. Jason, I did my last interview with you on Nair FM around 2.5 years ago, and we spoke about Columb Barracks in that interview. There's no need for us to repeat everything we said about Columb Barracks in our last interview and today's interview, because our last interview is still podcast. I got in touch with you today to talk about your call that Mullingar should have a museum and heritage centre. To start off, Jason, and I don't think I asked you this in our last interview, but can you tell me how or why you became so interested in history in general? I have to say that history has been a favourite topic of mine since I was a kid also.
Well, I suppose history, growing up in Mullingar, I was reared mostly by Granny and Grandad. My mother and father were there, but Granny and Grandad had a huge influence on my life. And of course, Grandad was originally from Dublin himself. And his father, William McKevitt, was a poor law guardian and had been elected by the United Irish League around the early 1900s. So my family were involved in Irish nationalism and, the fight for Irish independence from a long time. And of course, that intrigued me. And then, of course, my own grandfather, he served in Uglaig Nair in Irish Defence Forces, and he served with the 11 Dubs, which he served under Major Vivian De Valera, of course, the son of Eamon De Valera, who was on Taoiseach. And, I suppose I was growing up with all that history in my family, if that makes sense.
Okay.
And with Granny and Grandad, we would have visitors coming. And, of course, Granny, Second World War, emergency is called in Ireland. Women weren't allowed to join the Irish Defence Forces. So Granny went and her sisters went and joined the ATS in England and were there during the Battle of Britain, during the Blitz. And she came back to Ireland then before the war ended. And my granddad, who was in the Irish Defence Force, and got married. So, as I said, there was a lot of history there. And again, my granddad served in the Congo in 1961. And he served at the Battle of the Tunnel in the Congo. Now, that was about a few months after the siege of Jadotville. But Grandad went out, so he was there involved in that. So, again, when you grow up with that in your life and you're hearing all these stories and you're hearing who you're related to him, what she did, it kind of does intrigue the historical aspect of your brain. So I grew up with history, and that's one of the reasons I became a historian. And I went to university and, of course, got degrees and so on and so forth, and became a teacher, and now I'm a local historian in Mullingar.
That's cool, yeah. Okay, I've been interested in history since I was a kid. When I was a kid, I very young, I had an interest in the Second World War, and then I kind of moved past that, and then I was interested in the whole 1916 War of Independence kind of period, I've actually read so much of it today that if I actually see it on television, like the 1916, all this kind of stuff, anniversary and all, I don't actually pay as much attention to it because I've read so much of when I was younger, Jason, can you tell me more about your cause that Mullingar should have a museum and heritage centre?
Well, I suppose it's one of those key things. Like Mullingar is the county town for Westmeath. It's full of history and heritage. I mean, let's be honest, we had the Fleadh return to Mullingar there in 2022, first time since 1963. And we all know that the Fleadh Ceoil na hÉireann and Ceoltas was founded in Mullingar in the early 1950s. So that in itself is a historical context. And when the Fleadh returned in the summertime there, and it was an absolute great success. It was a great success, and Mullingar was ready for it, and Mullingar did it brilliantly. And that's not being biased, but we actually did do it brilliantly. But one of the main things that came up at that time, and even before it, was many of the visitors to the town were saying, this is great to be in Mullingar. The Fleadh, was invented here. The very first Fleadh, Ceoltas, was founded here. But where's the museum? Where can we find out more about this? Where is the artifacts? Where are the displays and this? And the real truth of it all, we didn't have a museum or heritage centre to showcase that. That's just the Fleadh. We then have, Mullingar is noted for other musicians, the great Joe Dolan. I mean, Joe Dolan there, no matter where you travel anywhere in Ireland and indeed parts of Britain, and even I was in Spain many years ago, and here's his music playing in the background in a Spanish restaurant. Joe Dolan there, we have a statue to Joe, and Joe has been legendary. He's put Mullingar on the map. And again, nothing really today showcase about Joe. And I'm going to be honest, the Dolan family are a fantastic family in Mullingar, and Joe's nephew's there, and all his niece and the whole lot, and his brother Ben. They're a great family, and they do great stuff for Mullingar. But I think it's now time where maybe Mullingar gives back to Joe Dolan and his family, and maybe, has a display, a museum that can showcase the greatness of Joe Dolan. And that's notwithstanding the likes of Niall Horan as well, another Mullingar man who's doing great stuff. Niall is an international superstar. Nothing there to showcase him. Now, in fairness to the Greville Arms Hotel in Mullingar, they have a small little display cabinets there with some historical artifacts. And that's a credit to the Greville Arms in Mullingar. But I think, and I believe, as a local historian, we need something more. When people come to town, we need something like an interpretive centre. We need something like a museum that can celebrate this. And that's only one aspect. That's just the musical aspect of Mullingar. Of course, Mullingar, then, we have our military heritage. And up until 2012, Mullingar was a garrison town and had been since its foundation in the 1180s. And we've nothing there to showcase that. And what an awful lot of people don't realise, Darren, is that after the Battle of the Boyne, and everybody's heard about the Battle of Boyne, 1690, and King Billy's army, and the Glorious Revolution, as some people would call it, and the defeat of King James, what not an awful lot of people realise is that after the Battle of the Boyne, King Billy's army settled in Mullingar. It was garrisoned, Mullingar was garrisoned by King Billy's army before they went on to attack on the siege of Athlone and the Battle of Aughrim. So we have all that as well in Mullingar of what happened there. So that's, a military aspect of the town. And that's only a tiny piece of the military aspect of the town. People have seen the movie, the Siege of Jadotville, and of course quite a significant number of that battalion that served in Jadotville in September 1961 were from Mullingar or had links to Mullingar. So even that's the military aspect there. Outside the road there, then we have the Hill of Uisneach, the sacred centre of Ireland. Where the 5 provinces, many, many decades, many centuries, even a millennia ago, would a sacred place for the High Kings of Ireland and the chieftains of Ireland would come together and play games and sports and the Festival of Lights out there. So we have this within the town here. We this is what we're from. And I suppose my call here about a museum, and I'm not the sole voice in this, because I know a number of years ago I went with the county councillor, Ken Dinn, and we met with Westmeath County Council about a proposal on this. And, that's a number of years ago, and still nothing has come of that. I know that Councillor Bill Collantine, only there last year, called for, something to be movement on the formation of a museum in Mullingar. And so there is that sort of work going on. And also with the museum as well, Columb Barracks, Mullingar, as we spoke about before, I was involved there with a group there, apart from the PPN group I was involved with, I was also involved there in a group, the Mullingar Cultural Quarter, with Declan Murray there and Marty Mulligan. And Marty, of course, many would know from the Electric Picnic, he's one of the promoters there, and Gerard Connor. We came together and we had a proposal together as part of the Columb Barracks project. And as you're aware, the Land Development Agency will be taking charge of Columb Barracks, where they're going to be looking at social housing in the Campfield area. But where the garrison is itself, the old structures which are protected, an awful lot of state bodies are looking at that, maybe to put businesses in or to put education facilities in, and that's fine and that's brilliant. But there's a proposal there as well that to give back to the community, that this would be an ideal location for the Heritage Centre and Museum, where we can celebrate all these historical aspects of Mullingar and indeed Westmeath and indeed the Midlands, that history.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you where you think would be the best place for it to be located on. So you just said it yourself there, Columb Barracks. So our last interview was about Columb Barracks. So there is social housing getting built on it, but part of it is going to remain protected, is it?
Yes, of course. You see, I suppose the garrison of Mullingar, of Columb Barracks, you're talking about just over 25 acres. You have a big area called the Campfield. And again, it is believed that this will be the location where there may be houses built. Again, nothing has happened there yet. I believe that the issue at the moment, they're waiting for the Department of Defence to sign over the barracks to the Land Development Agency, and I don't believe that has happened just yet. We need to hear more on that. But the actual structures itself, the barracks itself, the garrison itself, will not be part of that social housing per se. In other words, it's not going to be knocked. It can't be. And so we look at other state agencies are looking there to put other types of facilities there, whether it be education facilities, whether it be maybe hubs for startup businesses, digi hubs, work for home hubs, that sort of stuff there. And maybe, who knows, maybe even a little accommodation block there for maybe people who are homeless or something. That sort of stuff is what people are talking about there. And that's great. And we've put proposals in there. But I suppose the key thing that you and I are speaking about tonight is the history and heritage of the barracks. And, that's definitely the location we'd be looking at. And I know as part of the Mullingar Cultural Quarter Committee that I was involved with there, as I said, with Marty Mulligan, Dec Murray and Gerard Connor, that's what we've been looking at, that the barracks, it comes to life again with the history not only of the barracks, but the history of the music of Mullingar, to the history of the transport of Mullingar, because a number of years ago there was some great people from Mullingar who came together about a transport museum, a national transport museum, because if we know where Mullingar is, it's the very centre of Ireland. So, of course, it was a major rail terminus at one time. It wasn't, if you want to go to Sligo, you want to go to Galway, you pass through Mullingar. And so, but that transport museum, for one thing or another, just didn't materialise. And that wasn't because of the committee, because the committee, and I know some of the people who were involved in that, were absolutely brilliant people, great people, so they were. But I think there was more of the political buy-in at maybe national level probably wasn't there, from what I believe. So this is not a new thing, and it's not just a thing that I'm solo run here. This is, people in Mullingar are looking for this, and people in Mullingar would love this. I mean, if we go nearby, Darren, to Granard, and if I do say so myself, I visited a history and heritage centre out there called the Knights and Conquests, and it's managed by a friend of mine, Deirdre Orme, and that is second to none. It's second to none, where you look at the Anglo-Norman background of the foundation of Granard Town, which is like Mullingar. Mullingar was an Anglo-Norman town, and they celebrate that. Beside it, you have the old Mott, which the Mott and Bailey, but the Bailey's long, where, you go up that hill, and on that hill then is where Michael Collins and Kizzy Kiernan court, because of course Kizzy Kiernan was from Granard. So you also have that part in that Heritage Centre Museum, celebration of Michael Collins and his life in Granard. And that's Granard in County Longford, a town much smaller than Mullingar, and they're able to have something of the vision that we'd be talking about. Now, again, Darren, I'm not talking about a big, huge museum. I'm not talking about a big interpretive centre. I mean, let's be real here. If you're going to do something, you have to look at the financial implications, and these things start small, and then you work them up, and you see what way to work. And as I said, financially, before that question comes, if the Land Development Agency and other agencies are going to take over Columb Barracks, then absolutely part of the buy-in here is an investment in the history and heritage of the past of the barracks and the past of Mullingar, and money can be found there to help manage that there. You see, for, volunteers and leader grants are great when it comes to running little interpretive centres and running little museums, but long-term, they're not sustainable. So you're definitely looking from buy-in from state agencies into this, and that would be very much part of what we would be suggesting there. As I said, volunteers have done brilliant things around Ireland with their leader grants and other sorts of grants to get, but long-term, they don't last. They may last 10 years, they may last 15, but they always struggle. So what you need is a major anchor tenant, if you like, supporting the history and heritage of the town. And that's what we'll be looking at. So, if the barracks is going to go, if the barracks is going to be used for other stuff, then maybe part of that buy-in is that now's the time to strike for a museum and a heritage centre, to celebrate Mullingar's past. And I think what's important that, Darren, when we think of museums, we think of something where people look at old artefacts and they walk around and go, oh, that's lovely. But what I'd be talking about with a museum is where you have a professional historian, a professional genealogist, a professional archivist, a professional curator. That's another thing that's very important. And for instance, I myself, not a week doesn't go past that I'm not contacted from people around the world who are probably trying to find out stuff about Mullingar. I've had a person there last week contact me from America about, housing estates and housing in Mullingar, and how that operates, and could I give them any advice on it. I had other people because Mullingar was a garrison town, trying to check up about their great-grandfather who would have served in the barracks. That sort of stuff. What was the regiment that was in it when they were there in such and such a year? And again, I have a full-time job. I am not contracted, or I'm not employed by any local authority to do this work. I do this on my own volition, outside of my own main job itself. You know, whereas if we had a museum, if we had an interpretive centre, we would have people there that this would be their job. They're paid to do it, if that makes sense.
It's very interesting what you're saying there. And just the one thing you mentioned about the campaign for a cultural quarter, I haven't heard about that campaign until today. You mentioned it. Uh, is the campaign for a cultural quarter like for the quarter to be located in around Column Barracks, or is it kind of bigger, or what's the story?
Well, yeah. I suppose initially it was part of this thing. I mean, in fairness to the Land Development Agency, they did a consultation with Mullingar Town and part of the Column Barracks project, and people from all around Mullingar, from all different backgrounds, and even people from outside of Mullingar, made submissions of what their vision is for the barracks. And people have from around Mullingar made some great submissions, whether it be got to do with the environment, whether it be got to do with sustainability, whether it be got to do with business, whether it be got to do with accommodation, apartments, that education, that sort of stuff. And that was brilliant. And of course, this cultural quarter we'd be talking about is that Column Barracks not just be a place of education or a place of maybe, let's say, business or a place of, accommodation, but maybe that it does be a cultural quarter. I mean, you can be talking about maybe a Sunday, a Saturday or Sunday, have little mini concerts in it, the acoustics in the place. That's what we'd be talking about. You talk about maybe farmers' markets being held in it. That's sort of because Column Barracks is actually in the town of Mullingar. It's about, I'd say it's a couple of 100 yards from the railway station. It's a couple of 100 yards from the Green Bridge in the town. So it's actually in the town. It's not like it's outside the town. No, when it was built, it was outside the town. But Mullingar has grown so much that it's now within the town.
And you have, I don't know if you administer it, but you have a Facebook page, don't you? Or Facebook group for this campaign.
Yeah. Let's get a museum of Mullingar to showcase its history. And I mean, that Facebook page, that's used to maybe, the name is probably there to remind people that we don't have a museum per se, unless you go to the cathedral. The cathedral, in fairness, they have a museum that's open intermittently throughout the year. That's an ecclesiastical museum. And of course, as I said earlier, the Greville Arms have a couple of display cabinets, and they're doing a fantastic job at highlighting heritage, But I suppose what that Facebook page, Let's Get Museum Mullingar to showcase its history, that's not just about the campaign itself or anything like that, but it's also about where people can share images, people can share old photographs, people can send in questions. If that, that's what that page is about. So what you may see that on that is articles and, people saying, like, for instance, we have one person there saying that there'll be a history talk tomorrow night in the Greville Arms and that sort of stuff. So, but I suppose the name kind of reminds people is that we don't have a museum or a heritage centre, but the page itself, as well as showcasing that, is there also for people to share history tidbits and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and the page, I think it's a group, but he's have over 1,000 members, which is a huge number, I think,
That's right. There's over 1,000. There's something like 1,500 people have followed that page, which is brilliant. Which is brilliant. Like, because not everyone is on social media. And let's be honest, maybe history and heritage is not everyone's cup of tea, I mean, we all have to accept that. But yeah, so it's quite significant and growing as well.
Yeah, what you're saying totally makes sense to me. I don't know if you know this, but I lived in Mullingar when I was a kid for a few years. Do you know St. John's Terrace, do you?
Yes, I do, yes.
I lived on number 4 there. It was my mom's house growing up, and her father's before that. Like, her parents, my grandparents, they died before I was born, so I didn't know them. But yeah, they sold the house in the late 80s, and we moved to Dublin. But yeah, I have Mullingar is my number 1 heritage town outside of Dublin, But
yes.
So I love history since I was a kid, and heritage, and I could talk about it all day, probably like yourself. But yeah, what you're saying totally makes sense to me. Okay, Jason, do you have any plans for your campaign this year that you want to tell us about?
Nothing there at the moment. Well, it's not that I don't have plans, but I suppose everything's early stages. I mean, we keep speaking, we keep lobbying, we keep communicating with people, and I mean, I suppose the most important thing as we communicate, we show respect. I mean, one thing about this, it's not a blame game. We're not there to blame this one because there's an absence of a museum, but we're there to speak with people and like-minded people about the potential of, getting the museum founded and the interpretive centre, eventually. So there will be more stuff going on, no doubt, this year. I have been speaking with people. There probably will be more proposals at council level, by county councillors of that regarding the museum and interpretive centre and that sort of stuff. I suppose for me at the moment, I'll continue to do what I'm doing. I know I'll probably be busy during the FLA like I was last year, talking with people about the history of Mullingar, because Mullingar is a beautiful town. It's a wonderful town. And I don't know whether you're aware, Darren, but the weekend I'm also involved with Tidy Towns. I'm the historical advisor to Mullingar Tidy Towns. And we won, for a population over 5,000 people, we won Pride of Place.
I saw it on Twitter, yes. Brilliant.
Yeah, so there you go. So Mullingar, it's just a beautiful town. It's a great town. And I will keep doing what I do as a local historian of Mullingar, and being respectful, as I said, a great town. And it is mindful. Years ago, we did have a small museum in the Market Square in Mullingar, in the Market House. And that was run by the Westmeath Archaeological and Historical Society, who did an absolutely fantastic job. And that, finished up around the early 90s. It was a great little museum. But we have to be mindful, too, that it's 2023 and museums of the past, dare I say it, the type of museum that we have now is totally different. They're more interactive, that sort of stuff. As opposed to just looking at artifacts, you're probably looking at reenactments. You're looking at digital media type stuff, all that sort of stuff. So, so that's what you're looking at going forward. But yeah, to continue with your question there, I'll just keep doing the doing. I'll keep writing history articles this year. I will, be involved in the FLA. I'll still be advising people who contact us from all over the world about the great Mullingar. And I'll keep doing what I do with my colleague Ruth Ealingworth, who does the same, and Seamus O'Brien, another great historian from the town. So, so we'll all heads together and we do what we do on a separate individual basis, but we come together now and again,